Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my pleasure to welcome to today's program Cindi Hane, who is VP of Product Management at Elemica. And today we're going to talk about enabling labor, freight, and cash-to-cash savings with supply chain operating networks. Now, if you've been kind of reading my writings and listening to this program, you know I'm a big proponent of supply chain operating networks and done a lot of kind of educating the market on them over the past 10 years. And, a lot of times I admit the conversations might be a little bit too high level, too kind of, not grounded. And that's what we're going to do today is really ground kind of the value proposition of supply chain operating networks around specific, saving buckets and savings areas. And certainly great to have Cindi here on the program, who has a wealth of experience in supply chain logistics and in this area in particular, to kind of share some of her perspective and experience in working with clients in this area. Before we get started, I just want to remind those of you that are joining us live that if you do want to, ask Cindi a question or make a comment throughout the conversation, you can do so via the submit a question button or via the chat feature. And certainly if we've got time and it's a good and appropriate question, I'll try to weave it into the conversation. So with that, Cindi, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
So, before we dive into the topic, I always like to ask my guests, to provide a little bit of background, a little bit of perspective of, their career path and how they got involved in supply chain logistics. So why don't you do that? Why don't you tell us briefly a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Elemica?
Sure, I'd love to. Well, I actually started my career as a manufacturing engineer for Hallmark, where I worked in one of their store fixture plants. And my responsibilities included, among other things, programming a numerically controlled router to cut wooden parts for store fixtures. So that was a great first job out of industrial engineering school. After that, I joined logistics technology companies and spent about 8 years in logistics technology. And then the following 8 years or so in global third-party logistics companies. So throughout those years, I would be analyzing, designing, proposing, developing, and implementing various supply chain solutions. So some examples, global supply chain network design projects for consumer goods companies, vehicle routing and scheduling systems for a beer company as one example, routing beer trucks. Some project management of global VMI hub for the high-tech industry. So kind of the one common element throughout my career has been the use of analysis and analytical tools to either come up with supply chain strategies or to solve operational problems. And then for the last 3 years, I've been here at Elemica as the logistics product manager, where I manage a suite of logistics solutions that we deliver to our process industry customers as part of our supply chain operating network. So I guess, what strikes me about supply chain and logistics and what's been so interesting to me about that discipline has been just the sheer number of different opportunities and problems there are out there to solve. I like to get in and understand a problem and come up with creative solutions for it. So it's been a long and healthy career doing that.
Great, a wealth of experience there and diversity too, from a lot of different angles. I started my career as an engineer as well at Motorola and Polaroid, designing semiconductor chips. So it's incredible how you connect the dots, and how I always enjoy hearing how people go from different beginnings and end up in kind of the supply chain logistics realm, and I think a lot of it is, particularly for engineers, like you just said right now, it's part of our things that we enjoy is problem solving and dealing with a lot of data and looking at data and information to help solve problems, to help drive new innovations. And I think that's a common link that I hear from a lot of our guests here. So thank you. Great background there. So let's start kind of at the high level and kind of work our way down. One of the basic challenges that many supply chain executives have is kind of linking their business strategies with their supply chain objectives. What approach have you seen, executives use to get started?
Yep. What has always struck me about the challenges that we face as supply chain practitioners is just the sheer number of different solutions and project alternatives there are. And what I've seen supply chain executives do when trying to weed through that list is, in the past, traditionally, I think they've kind of fallen back on some of what we would consider maybe the low-hanging fruit. So let's go renegotiate contracts with carriers and service providers to try to gain some savings in that area. But as you know, in today's market, that's getting harder and harder. So one of the things that I really like to advocate is when you're faced with how to go through this list and how to prioritize what you can do to improve your supply chain, is to go back to your corporate strategy. So, by that I mean, how are you competing? Are you competing on cost? Are you competing on service? Are you competing on innovation? And do that and kind of compare those to your supply chain initiatives. And by those I mean efficiency, velocity, reliability, and agility. And what an interesting concept I think is to force rank those supply chain initiatives in light of your corporate strategy. So as an example, if you are a company that competes on innovation, then you're going to be trying to get the newest designs of your products to the market before anyone else. Your supply chain is going to need to be able to respond to kind of some upstream design level variability. So I believe that in that case, you should design a supply chain that probably sacrifices some efficiency for agility. So if you use, a model like that to kind of force rank these supply chain initiatives, that can help you start to create a roadmap for all of the projects and initiatives that you have that you're considering, and help prioritize those.
That's a great framework. I mean, I like that because I think not every company is created equal. Not every product line is at different there are different stages of their life cycle, and sometimes speed to market is important, and other times cost is important if you're a much more mature market, much more commoditized market where cost is the key thing. And obviously those things are going to, depending on what the strategy is, what the competitive landscape looks like, that's going to drive different supply chain objectives, and then obviously from that, the processes and the systems you put in place to achieve that. So let's take it down a level then, and then talk about how you justify investments in logistics solutions, right? So ultimately you have to link the value proposition of those solutions with your supply chain objectives and business strategies. Can you give us some examples of how you make those links?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's not enough to just force rank those objectives. You've got to identify what in your portfolio of potential projects are going to have an impact on those. And that's also, to me, where I think the supply chain practitioners or your supply chain solution partners need to kind of step up to the plate and help with that. So, I can give some examples for logistics solutions. For example, if you're worried about velocity, you're trying to improve the velocity of your supply chain, then I might propose to you to consider carrier appointment scheduling, for example, that would reduce the cycle time of your shipments. Reliability, for example, to me is probably best achieved if you do automation on a mass scale. So look across your supply chain and automate as many of your business transactions as possible. So yeah, those are efficiency, I think, is an easy one as well. I mean, you can look at things like freight cost management solutions to kind of get control over your carrier accessorials, and determine which of those accessorials you can that you're willing to accept, and which ones you can pass off to your customers. So just some examples of how how I've seen us link those supply chain objectives to various logistics projects.
No, that's great. I mean, ultimately, I think that, for a lot of executives, particularly those that might be a little bit smaller, mid-size, they struggle a little bit in terms of how to build that business case and how to make that link. Because ultimately, you have to get buy-in from the CEO and the CFO, right? And being able to put some of these applications and some of these solutions in aligning them with those business objectives and financial metrics that the CFO can truly appreciate. I think is a key component of that. All right, so let's go down to that kind of where the rubber meets the road on this, and talk about specific savings categories associated with supply chain operating networks, and which bring together B2B connectivity along with some of these logistics, different types of logistics and supply chain applications that kind of reside on top of that network. What are the main buckets of savings that you see out there, and what's the biggest bucket?
Right. So I tend to look at the opportunities for savings in three categories: freight cost savings, labor cost savings, and cash-to-cash cycle improvement. And I think as far as which one's the largest opportunity, I think traditionally, again, we've looked at freight cost savings to be the area where we've spent a lot of our energy. So things like doing a logistics sourcing event, especially if you haven't done it in a while, can be quite impactful. But as I said earlier, that's getting harder and harder to bleed that turnip, if you will. So to me, what I've seen and the trend I'm seeing is to evaluate more around cash-to-cash cycle improvement. And that one's a little bit more challenging in that for a couple of reasons. It's sometimes hard for companies to really to quantify that in relation to a particular project. But also, often when you implement a solution, such as, let's say, shipment visibility, in order to increase visibility to inventory, in order to truly achieve days of inventory reduction requires change management in your organization. So, your people are going to have the confidence in the data and the control over the operations in order to really start viewing the in-transit inventory as safety stock. And to me, I think that's where the concept of the supply chain operating network really starts to add, a great amount of value, because in a supply chain operating network, you have access to business transactions in real time, which you can enrich and enhance to make sure that data is usable, usable in exactly what you need. You can have the system alert to you when something is going awry, and you've got that collaboration space with your partners in order to handle the contingencies and righten the ship, if you will. So, to me, it's a perfect example. The supply chain operating network is a perfect example of how we can start to achieve, cash-to-cash improvements that might historically have been, a bit harder to quantify and obtain.
Yeah, I want to dive into kind of each of those buckets a little bit. But as you were talking there, I kind of another question popped into my head. You talked about the opportunity to kind of innovate or transform, business processes, and that sometimes is part of what will ultimately lead to the greatest, savings and opportunities. I mean, do you see, what challenges do you see, or what do you see as your clients doing in terms of the fine line between, automating and just doing what you're normally doing it, but in a more automated way, and kind of the benefits that could be derived there, versus, leveraging a platform, a supply chain operating network that opens the opportunity to kind of take a step back and do things completely different, or doing it in a way that might not have been the way people are accustomed to. That creates some change management issues, but challenges, but ultimately can create some even bigger savings. How do you see companies kind of dealing with prioritizing that in terms of, hey, let's just automate what we're currently doing and gain some efficiency there, versus, truly changing the way we do things?
So, one of the things we've noticed is that many of our customers will come to us and automate use the 80/20 rule and automate the top 20% of their partner transactions. And, this has provided a great amount of value to them. But if you start to look, well, let's, go to the next level, then often, some of the things that start to get in the way is what you suggested. But also the fact that, I think what you have to evaluate is, do you have different processes for different parts of the business because your partners, customer suppliers require it. Are you trying to force fit your standards and your processes on your partners? And incidentally, they're trying to do the same thing. So, I think what we've realized is that you got to, in order to really create a come as you are supply chain operating network, you've got to have that solution in the middle that can handle the differences on both sides and basically pose data and pose the information in a way that all parties can kind of keep their the processes the way that's optimal for them.
Yeah, I think that I've often said that the concept of there being true standards out there really doesn't exist, because even though you may have things such as quote unquote standard EDI transactions, right? Every company bastardizes it and changes the order, adds new fields, so on and so forth. So the ideal, I think, would be if there was truly some standardization there. But I think part of the challenge and some of the value that an operating network brings, as you mentioned, is really serving as that middle entity that can help each party kind of support their unique way of wanting to do things, but still be able to communicate and kind of provide a frictionless environment where those transactions and that information flow can still occur. So let's talk a little bit now about those savings buckets that you talked about, and kind of breaking down a little bit more, starting with labor. I mean, how are those labor savings realized?
Right. So certainly, if you look at labor savings, using a supply chain operating network to automate your transactions can save a significant amount of time that your team spends manually entering data or manually managing the processes of, for example, carrier tendering. But it's not just that area for labor savings. You can also consider, for example, for a carrier appointment scheduling solution, by smoothing out carrier arrivals, you're actually going to be providing an opportunity to optimize your on-site loading resources as well. So, seen some tremendous benefits, labor benefits from that kind of solution as well. And one area that we've maybe come to realize as being fairly significant from the labor standpoint is performance management. Because if you have all of the data in your supply chain operating network, and again it's enriched and posed to you in a way that makes sense to you, then it can save you a tremendous amount of time spent going to all the systems that you have and compiling and collecting data in order to create the performance management scorecards that your business is used to having.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big one there. I mean, I think one of the things that historically I still remember interviewing 3PLs, for example, and one of the CIOs of 3PLs several years ago. And one of the questions, or one of the insights that came out of my conversations with him, was they were spending half of their time cleaning and cleansing data. And when you think about the amount of labor and resources required to do that, and the missed opportunities of leveraging those resources into more value-added activities, is a huge benefit to being left on the table because of that. From the labor side, freight savings now. I mean, you touched upon a little bit about kind of the procurement side of things. How else are freight savings realized?
Sure. Yeah. So again, let's look at a carrier appointment scheduling solution, which, as I mentioned earlier, can help you with your on-site resources, but probably has a bigger impact on reducing detention costs. So there's one example there. Freight cost management solutions to get, again, tighter control over the accessorials that you're being charged by your customer, and those that you can pass off, or charged by your carriers, and those that you can pass off to your customers. So those can have some significant freight cost savings as well. And then if you just look at shipment visibility and being able to be more proactive about handling contingencies, then you can see reductions in expedited freight costs as well.
It strikes me that, a couple of times you've mentioned appointment scheduling, and it's one of those applications that I think is, in some ways, it's kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of TMS, or transportation management systems. I think it doesn't get as much, respect or visibility. What do you see? I mean, are you seeing great demand out there for appointment scheduling? Do you see among the clients and other prospects that you talk to? Are they? I mean, is this something that they're demanding, or is this something that you have to kind of educate some of these companies about in terms of the value that an appointment scheduling solution can provide?
That's a great question. So we deal almost exclusively with companies in the process industry. So many of our customers are chemical manufacturing companies. And they have a particular challenge in this problem because of the resources required and needed at the loading operation. So the problem itself is more than simply having an online system for the carrier to come and book appointments. It's actually a resource constrained scheduling problem, an optimization problem at the end of the day. So we've seen, because of those difficulty at finding feasible time slots, we have seen probably a bit more respect for that solution than maybe some in other industries. But I'll also say that there's a difference I've noticed between Europe and North America. In North America, there tends to be other methods of reducing congestion at manufacturing facilities. But I would contend that those other methods are introducing double handling in the process. So what we've implemented successfully in both Europe and in North America is a carrier appointment scheduling system that would allow you to eliminate any kind of double handling and shuttling of trailers, and dealing directly with the carriers to schedule the best appointments. So it optimizes their assets and their time as well as your own as well. So yeah, I think it is a little different in the market and different in the industry, but we've seen quite a bit of interest in that solution over the last 3 years.
Great. I think with your comments there, you kind of underscored the fact that it's not a trivial task in general, and certainly for specific industries and in specific geographies, there's some unique considerations there that go into the appointment scheduling process. Let's talk about the cash to cash now, which obviously is the one that probably resonates the strongest with the CEO and the CFO. Where are the savings coming from a cash to cash standpoint?
Sure. Yes, I mentioned earlier how a global shipment visibility solution can really help to improve days of inventory. But that requires, the change management in your organization, and so it's more than just a solution. It requires a full implementation across your business. But there are other logistics solutions that have a more direct impact under certain circumstances. So, say for example, you use a network of third-party warehouse providers to ship products to your customers on your behalf. If you haven't automated the PGI transactions with those partners, then you're going to have a delay from the time that the shipment actually got shipped until the time that you can PGI it in your system and actually invoice your customer. So automating those can have a direct days of inventory impact. So that's one good example. Another one that's getting a lot of attention here also in Europe for a couple of different reasons is proof of delivery. I've talked to customers for several years about the need to get better control and visibility over when deliveries occur. And I hear stories about, hearing from their customers when their deliveries occurred, as opposed to having a way to capture that information. So having a true authenticated proof of delivery can even if you don't invoice at delivery, but invoice at PGI, it can still have a significant impact on, reducing the variability and disputes associated with not having that authenticated POD. So it can have an impact on your DSO, even if you're invoicing at post goods issue. There's one point of the proof of delivery that is also interesting as well, not so much a cash-to-cash savings, but one that I think is interesting and I want to point out, and that is the VAT or VAT regulations in Europe. So, they put this regulation in place so that if any shipment that's delivered outside of country, it requires proof that shipment was made or that delivery was made outside of the country of origin in order for the shipper to receive a refund for VAT for the VAT tax. So, having the carrier in that process and truly authenticating the delivery of the goods becomes, not just a cash-to-cash, savings, but a true, real measurable savings in being able to acquire that VAT relief. So we've seen a real interest in POD in general, and I guess I would say, again, the supply chain operating network model is perfect for that problem because it can take data from the carrier in a myriad of ways, so not just the traditional EDI, but the telemetry from the carrier directly, web portal entries and email uploads and scanned and signed document uploads. So it provides enough of a different portfolio of methods for getting that authenticated POD into the system that it has passed the muster of tax authorities in Europe, and so that's a true good solution for that problem.
Yeah, proof of delivery is something that I'm hearing a lot of as well. And again, it's one of those things that you hear proof of delivery and it sounds like kind of a basic document or message, but I think as you've described, you can see the implications across the board in terms of how important it is and what real financial impacts it can have by facilitating that whole process. And one of the areas that I'm seeing a lot of activity around with proof of delivery is leveraging mobile technologies, right, to be able to capture that, either whether it's a signature or a GPS geocode to kind of show that the item was indeed delivered. Again, anything that can provide another data point, another validation point, and help shrink the time from to initiate that invoicing process, ultimately has some financial implications there. So Cindi, kind of as a way to wrap up, how should companies go about, prioritizing which initiatives to, or solutions to tackle first? I mean, do they go after the biggest savings opportunities first, or, is that always the best choice? Or, what advice do you give to companies in terms of where do they get started?
I think certainly the company needs to evaluate the candidate projects that they have and certainly go after the ones that are going to have the biggest impact. But, I guess just to reiterate, I believe that there's so many of those initiatives out there that, you should start a little further up and prioritize them based on your corporate competitive strategy. And I think that's going to help you in a couple of ways. One, at the very least, you're going to have help elevating the supply chain function within your industry because you're going to be talking about your supply chain projects in the same light, in light of the corporate strategy that your company has laid forth. But I think at the very most, if you look at it that way and use a framework like that, then you could truly unlock the competitive nature of your supply chain.
Great advice. And kind of to wrap up here completely, I want to shift gears and talk about something that ask you about something that I in the past I've asked a lot of my guests, and I kind of got away from it, but I want to start asking them again. It's really, when you look at your career, the experience that you have in supply chain logistics, what advice would you give to students and young professionals that are just getting started in the industry? I mean, certainly one of our goals here at Talking Logistics is to help provide a medium for, students and young professionals to learn about the industry and to give them advice in terms of, not only what's happening in the industry and some of the neat trends happening on the technology front and the business process front, but also some career advice. I mean, things that they should be perhaps thinking about, or skills or things that they should be developing to, have a successful career. So what advice would you give to students and young professionals?
I've thought about this a couple of times throughout my career. One of the things that I kind of stumbled into was consulting, and I never, worked for one of the big five or however many there are now consulting companies. I did quite a bit and still do quite a bit of consultative meetings with, approaches with customers. And if I look back, I think, something that I might have done differently, and I would encourage students to think about now, is to really diving into a career in consulting, because you can get so much experience in such a short amount of time, and use that as kind of to gain an understanding of what's truly going to be fit your strengths. I'm a big fan of figuring out what your strengths are and then focusing your energies on those and improving upon those, as opposed to finding, trying to improve in areas that you're just not going to naturally be a good fit at. So from a true career guidance standpoint, as opposed to any particular trend in the supply chain space, I would say that's my biggest piece of advice.
And great advice, and I think certainly that a lot of folks that I know in the industry really did start in consulting or had some consulting experience within their own companies, and that has certainly enriched their ability to kind of move up the learning curve and the career ladder in supply chain logistics. So Cindi, thank you again for providing some great insights and advice on how companies can leverage supply chain operating networks to, realize savings in labor, freight, and in cash to cash. And again, it's such a broad topic that I'm sure we could easily spend another hour talking through other types of benefits and savings buckets and so forth. But I think we'll save that for another episode. So thank you very much for your time and joining us today.
Thank you again for having me. It was great.
And, we didn't get any questions today, but if you are watching this episode on demand and you have a question or a comment for Cindi, you can find the episode on talkinglogistics.com, and you can post a question or a comment there, and I'm sure Cindi will be more than happy to respond via that platform. So with that, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.